Hey, John Gilroy here. I spent 25 years doing live radio on NPR, and I did everything in the world to avoid using an SBOM. Today, I'm going to spend 25 minutes just talking about SBOMs. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. In the virtual studio today is a gentleman by the name of Dave Yurkevich. He is the Director for Federal Programs and Cyber Engineering for Fortress Information Security. Ooh, that's a tough title, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a mouthful, a lot of complex things out there.
Yeah, we're going to call you Dave, and we're going to go fortressinfosec.com for more information. Let's talk about this SBOM thing. I had a lot of fun. I was on the air with Kojo Namdi at WAMU for 25 years. And so if we ever would have used SBOM or even come close to it, they'd yank us. So I never got yanked. So what the heck is an SBOM when it comes to software development, my federal listeners here?
Sure. SBOMs are software bill of materials. So think of the building blocks of software, same as building blocks to any kind of home or component or vehicle. So software is made of multiple pieces of software.
So traditionally, because I'm older than you, you go to college and learn how to code and didn't have any memory. So you had to code very efficiently in memory. Then you go out there and you code and code. Now today, what they're doing is just grabbing stuff off repositories or libraries and popping it in there. And so the problem is, let me define the problem, is that lazy John Gilroy just goes, grabs an older version of something, pops it in there. Then I go out to lunch and come back in, and I've caused all kinds of trouble. Meanwhile, Dave goes, no, wait a minute. What did you just pull down? And how do we make sure that's the case? And so what's happened is companies have come up where they said, hey, you know what we're going to do? If you ship something to Rwanda, you got to have a bill of materials, don't you? Right. I know what that is. FAS, free alongside. I know all about export documentation. So if you have a bill of materials for exporting, you got to have maybe a bill of materials for software. So that's what we're talking about. Something that says, no. Dave puts his imprimatur on it and says, yes, this code X102 is valid. So that's what an SBOM does?
Yes. So you got it right. I mean, I went to engineering school, so I also learned to code, and I too would like the easy button to go to a repository and pull a certain function or something that someone's already built that works and integrate it into my software. But as you alluded to, that opens up other vulnerabilities, right? You may want that one function out of that code, but you have other things that are disabled or could provide backdoors for some bad people to do some bad things within your software.
Right. And I think it's the old whack-a-mole game where they go after the network is hardened. Okay. They go after the apps get hardened. Okay. They go after the APIs get hardened. Oh, well, we'll go for the backups. Okay. Well, no, we'll go up to the code itself. Oh, go up the chain. So the malicious actors are going up the chain and installing malicious code in. So those naive, lazy guys like me just grab it off of there. And so what your company can do is, okay, at Fortress, we can do is that when you're over there at the DoD and try to design something, we can assure that this code is compliant and safe. Is that what you folks do?
Yeah, we do multiple things, but SBOMs is one of those components that we look at. So what we're most concerned with, right, is going back originally to your point that the DoD or the federal government is using code, commercial off-the-shelf code. And so understanding that how that's being integrated into their systems and ensuring that what they're getting is, in fact, what is intended for, but also, again, isn't full of extraneous information or code that is not necessary, that then provides, again, that attack vector where an adversary could come in and definitely, do some things that, the government would not want them to do. We also provide not just that, but you look at it from the hardware side, and then you look at it from a vendor side. So we don't just necessarily focus on the SBOM piece exclusively, but we look at it holistically, because you look at the vendor side and you say, is that vendor, how is their cyber hygiene? How are they influenced by nation states or other? And then look at the hardware piece of it too, and where is that coming from? Because those are entry points within the software and from the vendor side.
You know, a lot of listeners may be tuning into this and they're walking their dog or they're jogging or something. They're going, oh, this is really an esoteric issue. You know, David's got this fancy pants background, engineering, MIT, all kinds of brains, and he's in the weeds at the DoD. And this really doesn't apply to most folks. But lo and behold, 2021, there was an executive order that said, hey, SBOMs are important. So it's not just Dave being smart. It's everyone's got to be worried of this, isn't it?
Yeah, everyone's got to be worried about it. And I'll give you a recent example. This month, the Wall Street Journal just posted an article from the NSA chief talking about how China is putting in code within our critical infrastructure to pre-position it. And this isn't weapon systems necessarily, but it's your water treatment plants, your electrical grid, things that your wireless networks. These are things that we as everyday people use and rely on every day.
So there is a new executive order I got out 1 hour ago, and it mandates I have to say artificial intelligence now every 22 minutes. So I have to bring up artificial intelligence. So it applies to everything. I guess it's going to be cutting my grass. It's going to be cleaning my gutters. Artificial intelligence is going to be everything. But I think this may be what I think is a good application for using artificial intelligence to examine code. So what you can do is you can harness all that power to examine the code, maybe compare it. So is that how you folks apply artificial intelligence?
Yeah, the way we look at it, and we're rolling out some products using artificial intelligence, and it goes back to that holistic approach, right? We can analyze the code. There are tools that we have that do that. But then it's comparing that against other data sources. As I said, it's looking at the vendor, it's looking at potentially what the hardware implications are, and all of those complexities, putting together that picture. AI helps us put together those insights that maybe would take time for us to come up with, but also looks at it from maybe a different angle that we may have not seen before. So that's how we're leveraging it on our end. Years
ago, Microsoft would release code and they'd say it's gone gold. And so they're done with it and they can put their feet up and smoke a cigar. That's not how it works today. I think what happens is if I get a bunch of code off the shelf and Dave gives an imprimatur and a nihil obstat and said, yeah, it's good stuff. This code's changing all the time. And so this whole idea of absolutely critical code being valid or being free from malicious, it's a continuous operation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's continuous. I mean, there's constantly updates being applied. I mean, think about, on your laptop, you're getting your Windows update, right? And a lot of times code is never going to be perfect. So there's bugs, there's always potential vulnerabilities that are in there. So it's a continuous effort to kind of keep the walls of the castle safe and secure.
A lot of cybersecurity people talk about vulnerabilities and key vulnerability lists. And they talk about signatures and everything else. So are we at a point where that's in the rearview mirror and maybe we should focus more on behavior-based rather than just signature-based activities?
I think it's both have tremendous value. Like the signature side of it is something we've been using for quite a while, and there's pros and cons to that. I think on the behavioral side, you're definitely able to look at the different patterns in a different way than a signature-based method. And that allows you to potentially zero in on those 0-day threats. But I think in combination of the two, because the world is still very complicated, they too, to me, are complementary. And it's just another way to combat, the complex world of software and vulnerabilities.
About 2 years ago, I was in Los Angeles and I was down Long Beach and I saw those ships stacked, waiting to get in. And well, there's a good visual description of a supply chain, huh? Yeah. And so this also is applied to software. So to speak, people, I guess in 2 years, it's changed that much, but people still talk about a supply chain topography, supply chain vulnerability. We talk about software code.
Yeah, it's always part of within our federal client space. understanding what you're buying is really what it comes down to and where it's coming from. And in today's very connected global world. I mean, you just mentioned the shipping side of things, right? Those are ships coming from all over the world, bringing in different products and materials, right? So it should be the same way with software. So, knowing what we're buying and what we're putting it into, and really understanding those risks, I think for especially mission critical or critical infrastructure systems, is really important more than ever.
I remember there was something come out maybe in the last couple of years from the NSA, and they used that phrase, the software supply chain, securing the software supply chain. So maybe it's not an outdated. Things are changing so fast post-COVID, and artificial intelligence is changing all kinds of ways. And so I imagine that's a question that when you sit down with federal leaders, and they go, well, we know about Fortress, we can work on sensitive systems, but so how exactly are you using artificial intelligence to make my life easier? And that's really what people want, isn't it? So Dave, how do you make my life easier using AI?
I make it easier because I'm able to, I'll say, illuminate, the different avenues where you have risk in your components, your software, hardware, and vendors. And so AI to us is a very useful tool in being able to do that quickly and cheaply as well.
I heard the word illuminate when people look at asset discovery and finding what assets they have. And the last person I spoke to said they're working with a federal agency and they did a little discovery and they found out there were data. They didn't know they had these databases. They just didn't know. And I think this whole idea of illuminate, I think this is get that flashlight and open up the hood and look under the car. So I think this whole idea of discovery sequence, I think it's going to be more and more, especially in this hybrid world we live in, where things connected to this and this dependency on that, and someone in Oregon pulls this code in, and you didn't realize that. And so these dependencies, illuminate seems to be the phrase that pays, doesn't it?
It is. I mean, it's really looking at the black box, right? What is inside of it? What are you? How is it used? And shining that light inside of it to see, is it what you expect it to be and what it's supposed to do?
So we have a supply chain. We also have vulnerability management. So what you can offer, there's a couple of different offerings from the company. I think there's, of course, the supply chain we talked about. So the vulnerability is separate from that, or is this a whole set? You put on your blue baseball hat for that, or how is that different from supply chain management?
Oh, it's all connected. I mean, if you're, but when I talk about the SBOMs and what you uncover, they're going to contain vulnerabilities, and that's where you start to aggregate, say, many different software components, and one SBOM could have thousands of different vulnerabilities. How do you go and prioritize those? So vulnerability management, especially with our clients on the federal side who have a very large amount of assets, they need some way to manage that, and we have ways and algorithms that help them prioritize that, because as we know, resources are limited in going to tackle and patch and apply mitigations. And so being able to tackle the most critical ones and being able to really focus on those and focus those resources is what I think provides the best value.
I was raised Catholic, and I have some sensitivities, some Catholic words I learned years ago. I learned Latin, by the way, many, many years ago. But they used to talk about immutable gifts and immutable this. And that's where I see being kind of dragged out of the recesses of the Catholic Church from 100 years ago and applied to a lot of software concepts, especially with this vulnerable code and not vulnerable code. So if Dave walks in with his big red stamp and goes, yes, John, this is good stuff, does that mean it's immutable? Or where does that word fit in this discussion? Anywhere?
Well, it's never going to be, right? I mean, it's a snapshot in time. So you are essentially getting what you think you're getting at that moment in time. So it's a constant process. We do continuous monitoring as well, because we know that, and as we talked about earlier, that it's software is ever changing. It's never stamped final and then lasts forever without any need to touch it. We know that is not the case, and being able to really keep track of it and what it's doing, and sometimes exposure of vulnerabilities happens at a later date. So you might have old software, and then hey, a vulnerability from the National Vulnerability Database has come up for that version you have, and you weren't even aware of it at the time. So now you have to go back and fix it. And that's where we help illuminate that, using that word
There
again,
we go. Yeah.
and help our clients really go through that process.
Speaking of process, that's the phrase that pays. My last interview with a woman named Melissa from a company called Excella. They do a lot of software development, and they introduced me years ago to this impressive phrase, DevOps and DevSecOps and DevOps. And so what I'm thinking is that, they talk about it's baked into the cake. Well, the DevOps people are baking the cake. And so this process almost has to be part of the DevOps environment now, doesn't it? It's just that, well, yeah, this is part of the whole deal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's where before you deploy, you're checking out, is the code secure? Because you don't want to deploy unsecured code. And then you have to continually scan and check that periodically and ensure that that is the case going forward. So it's in cyber, it's always busy. There's never an end point. It's always moving, and you have to be ready and continually watching.
And so I go to a safe repository. I grab some code. Okay. I change a feature on it. I check it in. It gets tested. It goes to automation. And if there's a problem, it gets rolled back. I mean, this whole idea of iteration, it makes things much more. It sounds great. Hey, we'll just iterate. Yeah, well, no, wait a minute. You know what that means? It means you may have to back up if there's a problem, and then you get delays. And so it sounds real nice. You and I sitting on the deck and having a coffee, and we're talking about iteration. But this can slow down the whole game, can't it?
Oh, yes, it definitely can. But what could slow you down further is if you're not really doing your due diligence and checking that. And it's really managing risk, right? You're never going to be zero risk. You might have that position when you deploy or when you analyze the code, but then when other vulnerabilities come out against it, you have to then go and mitigate that. But I really think that it's an ever evolving process, and it's something that we here help our clients navigate. And we not just tell them what they have in terms of vulnerability. We also provide recommendations how you can fix it. So we want to be able to inform, but also provide solutions of where they can actually change something and impact it.
So I walk over to your house and go, yep, you got a flat tire. Bye. It's like, hey, you're a lot of help, John, aren't you? Yeah, great help. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to so many different people. A lot of cyber podcasts. There's a guy named Peter Chestnut. He works for a company called Checkmarks, and they're involved in this whole world of supply chain. And he had a fun fact, and I love this fun fact. He said that that they did a study last year in 2023. 41% of attacks were in the supply chain itself. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, if it's a good number, a bad number, but it's a big number. I mean, it's not something. If okay, we have an expert. Dave says, okay, it's a problem. Okay, then we have Peter Chestnut saying it's a problem. Then we have the NSA saying it's a problem. Then we have the Executive Office of the President saying it's time. It's time to get a hold of Fortress and going, hey, fortressinfosec.com. Time to have a talk or something. I mean, if you're getting bombarded, you really have to think about it, don't you?
Yeah, it's as I said, it's very much a constant work. And I think that's why where we specialize in, right, is on that supply chain end of it, because that is definitely an attack vector that is being exploited and used today. And we are, really want to ensure that those components and systems that our federal clients and are buying aren't really opening up that attack surface to themselves. One thing is, downloading software onto your laptop, but, on top of that, where's your laptop made? What's inside of there too, especially if you're tying it to a mission critical system, right? And I think that's really where it's looking at all of the different entries and data points and attack surfaces to really come up with a comprehensive and holistic view of risk around cyber.
I'll reveal some risks to you here, Dave. You may not believe this or not. I was on Twitter for many years. I sent over 16,000 tweets. And because I got popular, someone started to emulate me. And so I sent an email to Twitter and I said, I did nothing wrong. What's going on? And so who they cut? Me. Got my head cut off. Okay. So here's a parallel. There's a federal agency that is using, let's say, a cloud service provider, and they're using a hybrid cloud. They use another cloud service provider. and something bad happens. They're not, cloud service provider A has got all the checkbox, B's got all the checkboxes, but there's some kind of a blue and red purple thing going on where, these things, these combinations, I think the hybrid cloud's got much more dangerous than people think. Maybe they're a little naive or something. I mean, is this an issue you have with the hybrid cloud where unexpected incidents, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, you're basically managing two different environments, right? You have let's say a cloud provider, they provide the infrastructure, they patch at regular intervals, they have their SLAs, and then you have your own, right? And they necessarily aren't going to match. I mean, you can try to, and you can, one could be better than the other, but there's likely to be some delta. And that is another vector. I mean, there are pros and cons to that, right? To operating in a hybrid state. But I think it's got to be balanced with, what your risk posture is and how you would manage and tackle as they come.
Well, here's a real practical problem. I'm going to end this discussion with the real practical issues here of something called procurement. And so I go up to my procurement and go, well, I'm using this a cloud thing. Okay, great. And then I go, well, I'm using this other one to hybrid. Okay, great. And then we get a problem. And then I've got to get Dave from Fortress to come in and maybe just see what's going on. They're going to say, well, wait a minute. They fit all the check boxes on both sides. It's a practical issue because I think from an acquisition perspective, they have to justify, well, that's not anticipated. You're going to the Bahamas. You probably don't need snowshoes and a big old coat. I mean, and so is procurement an issue here? Is just trying to get people to realize that, no, maybe have to bring Fortress in to make sure we are safe?
Yeah, actually, I mean, when you look at the acquisition cycle, and it's more so less on the cloud provider example, but more on you're buying a server, right? And that server is going into a specific piece or a specific system. And you're doing, because it's the federal sphere, right? A lot of systems that run a very, very long time, and you'll need to do upgrades, and that server that you had doesn't exist and you have to procure a new one. So now you start to look at, there isn't a one-for-one replacement, that there's something different, and you may have a range of choices. So, not just the performance piece of it, but now you can start to look at, and we can help look at, well, from a security standpoint, this is a more secure, product than another. And we don't make those decisions for our clients, but we provide that information so that they can make an informed decision on their procurements and acquisitions.
Right. It's almost like going to the dentist. Well, here's your choice, this or that. But ultimately, they're responsible. They have the responsibility for that. Well, this has been real good. I'm glad that I didn't use an SBOM through this whole 25-minute interview, but you used it a couple of times, so I'm going to have to call the FCC on you and get you in trouble. It's always nice to look at something like that in the software bill of materials and the whole idea of exporting and where the vulnerabilities are. And I just think these malicious actors are just going through every single possible source. Okay, this door is closed. This door is closed. This door is closed. Try this, try this, try this. And and I know, we've been around that. There's definitely code running the federal government now that has got something placed in it that's sitting there and not doing anything and waiting for the appointed hour, as our friends at the NSA told us about. So software bill of materials, verifying what you have is going to be more and more important over the years. Well, unfortunately, Dave, we're running out of time. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Dave Yurkevich. He is the Federal Programs and Cyber Engineering Director for Fortress Information Security. And I'll put the link to their website in the show notes here. If you want to write it down, it's fortressinfosec.com. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.